The dog didn't bark. That's what nobody understood. Every other animal in that shelter lost its mind the moment a stranger walked through the door, clawing, howling, throwing themselves against the chain link like the world was ending. But Kennel 47 went silent. The German shepherd inside just stopped, lifted his head, stared at the man in the doorway with eyes that held something heavier than recognition, something closer to memory. Jack Brennan hadn't come here looking for a dog. He didn't know what he was looking for. He just knew that 8 months after the worst night of his life, after 6 of his brothers died in the Syrian desert and the Navy told the world it never happened, he still couldn't sleep without seeing their faces. What he didn't know was that the answer to everything had been waiting for him, wearing a collar, in a concrete kennel, watching the door. If this story pulls you in, stay until the end. Like it, share it, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The thing about coming home from a war that officially didn't happen is that nobody knows how to talk to you. They can't thank you for your service because on paper, you weren't there. They can't ask what it was like because the answer is classified. They can't even look you in the eye for too long because somewhere behind yours is something they don't want to understand. Jack Brennan had been stateside for 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. He knew the number not because he was counting down to anything, but because each morning he woke up at 0430, body still running on combat rhythm, and stared at the ceiling of his San Diego apartment until the sun came up. Counting was just something the brain did when it had nothing left to plan. He was 34 years old. In the teams, that wasn't ancient, but it wasn't young either. 12 years of service, 4 deployments, 2 Silver Stars, 1 Navy Cross he'd never talk about, buried in a drawer underneath a utility bill, and a broken watch. His body carried the kind of damage that looked fine in clothes and felt like broken glass without them. 2 screws in his left shoulder, a reconstructed knee, and a chunk of scar tissue along his lower back from a piece of fragmentation that had come within 2 inches of his spine. Physically, the doctors cleared him. Psychologically, they offered him a pamphlet and a referral to a therapist named Dr. Okafor, who had soft hands and a foam stress ball on his desk, and who'd never heard a gunshot fired outside of a movie theater. Jack had gone to 3 sessions. He'd stared at the wall. He'd answered questions in the same flat tone he used to report grid coordinates. Then he'd stopped going. It wasn't that he didn't believe in therapy. It was that every time Dr. Okafor asked him to describe the moment the mission went wrong, Jack found himself back in the dirt of Al-Hasaka province, watching the first explosion tear Martinez off his feet. And he couldn't describe it because describing it would make it a story. And it wasn't a story. It was a thing that had happened. It was a thing that was still happening inside his chest at 0430 every morning. 6 men dead. Lieutenant Commander Torres, Petty Officers Martinez, Okafor, different Okafor, a man who ran toward fire instead of away from it. Rains, Kowalski, and Park. 6 men, all classified as killed in action during an op the Navy, formally denied had ever occurred. And Jack had survived. Not because he was better, not because God had a plan. He'd survived because Kowalski, 26 years old, Pittsburgh Steelers tattoo on his left forearm, had pulled him into a drainage ditch in the first 10 seconds of the ambush and taken the burst of fire that should have killed them both. One man's body had become a sandbag. That was the math. That was what war looked like when it wasn't a movie. Jack had made it to the extraction point. Alone. Bleeding through his plate carrier, carrying Kowalski's tags and nothing else. The debrief had lasted 9 hours. Afterward, a man in a suit with a government ID Jack wasn't allowed to photograph had sat across from him in a windowless room in Coronado and explained slowly and carefully that the operation had been a training exercise gone wrong, that the personnel losses were a tragedy, and that any future discussion of the event in public, private, or unofficial capacity would constitute a violation of Jack's NDA and Title 18 of the United States Code. Then the man had shaken his hand. Jack had looked at the hand for a long moment before taking it. 8 months later, he was standing in the parking lot of the San Diego County Animal Services Shelter on Gaines Street, engine off, staring at a building he'd driven past 100 times and never once considered entering. His mandatory civilian reintegration coordinator, a well-meaning woman named Steph, who wore lanyards and said things like leveraging your skill set, had suggested volunteering, said it helped with transition, said it gave veterans a sense of purpose without the pressure of employment. She'd emailed him a list of options: food bank, veterans outreach, Habitat for Humanity, animal shelter. He'd ignored the email for 3 weeks. Then one Tuesday morning at 04:30, staring at the ceiling, he'd gotten up, put on a gray t-shirt, and driven here. He didn't fully understand why, but in his experience, the things that moved him without explanation were usually worth following. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and wet dog and something faintly sour underneath. A woman behind the desk, mid-40s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, name tag reading Carol, looked up when he pushed through the door. Volunteering or adopting? Volunteering. You fill out the online form? No. She looked at him over her glasses. He looked back. She sighed, pushed a clipboard across the counter. Fill this out, photo ID. We'll do a quick tour. You're not afraid of dogs? No. Some of them bite. I've been bitten before. She gave him a look that said, not by our dogs, and handed him a pen. The tour took 20 minutes. Carol walked him through the facility with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. The intake area, the medical wing, the cat section, the general population dog kennels. The noise was enormous. Every kennel they passed erupted, barking, whining, bodies throwing against chain-link fencing with frantic energy. Jack kept his hands loose, his pace even. He'd learned a long time ago that animals and children could feel tension in adults before adults knew they had it. Carol was talking about feeding schedules and kennel assignments and leash protocols, and he was listening, but part of him, the part that had spent 12 years scanning rooms, reading environments, categorizing threats, was also moving through this building the way he moved through any unfamiliar space. Filing, processing, looking for the thing that didn't fit. The thing that didn't fit was the kennel at the end of the row, number 47. The dog inside it wasn't barking, wasn't pacing, wasn't throwing itself at anything. The German Shepherd stood in the center of the kennel, not at the gate, not cowering at the back, center, like he'd placed himself there intentionally. His coat was the classic black and tan, thick and well-maintained, though his muzzle was going gray in the way of older working dogs. His eyes were amber brown and completely, unnervingly still. He was looking at Jack, not at Carol, not at the general direction of the door, at Jack specifically, with the kind of fixed, evaluating stare that Jack associated with operators, men who were constantly assessing, constantly running calculations. Jack stopped walking. Carol took 3 more steps before she realized he wasn't beside her. "Oh," she said, turning. Her voice changed. "That's Axel. Don't... How long has he been here?" A pause. 8 months? Something cold moved through Jack's chest. "What's his story?" Carol walked back to stand beside him, her arms crossed, not defensively, the posture of someone who'd had this conversation before and it never ended well. Military working dog. Retired out of SOCOM, that's Special Operations Command. We don't get a lot of these, but sometimes they come through when the handlers are gone and there's no other placement. She hesitated. His handler died. We don't know the details. The paperwork that came with him was sparse. Has anyone else taken him? 3 families tried. He wouldn't eat. One couple said he spent the whole first night just standing at their door, waiting. Not aggressive, just waiting. She shook her head. He came back each time. The 3rd family had him for 2 weeks. Brought him back because he stopped responding to them entirely, just shut down. Jack looked at the dog. The dog looked at Jack. The staff calls him 8-month Axel, Carol said, with a kind of tired affection. The trainer we brought in said he bonded to his handler at a level that made it almost impossible for him to transfer. She said some working dogs are like that. They choose someone. And when that person is gone, she shrugged, they just wait. The German Shepherd had not moved, had not blinked, had not done anything except continue his evaluation. Jack stepped forward. Carol put a hand on his arm. I have to tell you, he hasn't let anyone put a leash on him since he got here. We have to manage him with 2 handlers and a slip lead to get him out for yard time, and even then, Open the kennel. Sir, I'm not going to hurt him. A beat. Open it. Carol looked at him for a long moment. She'd worked with veterans before. She recognized something in his face that she couldn't name but understood. She reached for the latch. The kennel swung open. Axel didn't rush, he didn't cower. He stood exactly where he'd been standing, watched the door open, and then, deliberately, unhurriedly, with a kind of quiet authority, walked forward and sat down directly in front of Jack. Perfect sit. Front paws squared, back straight, not like a dog performing a trick, like a soldier reporting in. The sound in the kennel row, 60 dogs barking and howling, suddenly felt very far away. Jack crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level. This close, he could see the dog's age in the fine lines around his muzzle, the slight dimming of his coat's shine. He could see old scars along the left shoulder and one on the right ear where hair had never grown back. A dog who'd worked and bled and kept working. "Hey, buddy," Jack said quietly. Axel put his nose forward and breathed in Jack's face, slow and deliberate, scent acquisition, processing. Then, for the first time since Jack had seen him, the dog moved his tail. Once. A single controlled wag, like he was offering acknowledgement rather than excitement. Behind Jack, Carol exhaled very slowly. "I've worked here 11 years, she said. I have never seen him do that." Jack didn't adopt Axel that day. He sat in the kennel for 2 hours. Carol brought him a folding chair that he didn't sit in and eventually stopped checking on him. He crouched or sat on the concrete floor while the German shepherd settled beside him. Not pressed against him, not needy, just adjacent, like a partner maintaining tactical spacing. Jack talked. Not much, but some. He talked about Kowalski, about the way the guy used to sing Steelers fight songs under his breath during long vehicle movements, never loud enough to be annoying, just loud enough that you knew he was there. He talked about Torres, who'd been meticulous about mission planning to the point of obsession, and who'd also cried at movies, full on, unashamed, which Jack had always found oddly reassuring. Axel listened the way good dogs do, which is with their whole body. At the end of the 2 hours, Jack stood up and said, "I'll be back tomorrow." The dog looked at him. "I'm not walking out on you. I just need to do the paperwork right." He could have sworn the dog understood that. He was back at 0700 the next morning with the completed application. By 900, Axel was in the back seat of Jack's truck, sitting upright, watching the road. The first full day was strange in a way Jack hadn't expected. Strange in a good way, which was its own kind of unsettling. Axel moved through the apartment methodically, not frantically. He wasn't anxious, wasn't destructive. He simply checked, room to room, corner to corner, every window, every door. The bedroom closet, under the bed, the bathroom. He was doing a sweep, and when he was done, he returned to the living room, chose a position near the front door with sight lines to both the hallway and the main window, and lay down. Jack stood in the kitchen doorway watching this. "You're not retired," he said. "You're just between deployments." The dog's ears moved. It took Jack 4 days to notice the collar. He'd been careful not to mess with Axel too much in the early days, but give the dog space, let him establish his own comfort level. But on the 4th night, Axel pressed up against him on the couch while Jack was watching game film of nothing in particular, and the collar caught the light wrong. Jack looked at it. Standard issue looking, black nylon webbing, but it was older than it should have been, and there were small wear marks on the underside that didn't match normal dog movement. Like something had been pressed against the inner surface repeatedly. He reached over slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving the dog time to read it, and turned the collar slightly in his hand to read the embossed plate. Axel/MWD/ID K47-09-Delta. K47, Kennel 47. Jack's hand stilled. That was the shelter's designation. He knew because he'd filled out the intake form himself. They'd labeled Axel's kennel card with the number when he came in. It was just a shelf number, an administrative notation. But this plate was older than the shelter's intake. This was original equipment. He looked at the ID string again. K47. Not a kennel number, a designation, a unit designation. He took the collar off carefully, Axel let him, watching his hands. The inside of the collar had a thin strip of rubber along the underside lining. Standard, or so it appeared. Jack ran his thumb along it, felt a seam, pressed down. A section of the rubber peeled back. Underneath, sewn into the nylon with tight military stitching, was a small zippered compartment no bigger than a thumb drive. Inside the compartment, a micro SD card. Wrapped in electrical tape, no bigger than a fingernail. Jack set it in his palm. The room was very quiet. On the side of the tape, in permanent marker, someone had written 4 digits. The same 4 digits that Jack's SEAL team had used as a numerical authentication code. An internal call sign specific to their unit. A code that appeared in no official documentation. A code that 6 of the 8 people who'd ever known it were now dead. Jack stared at the card for a long time. Then he looked at Axel. The dog looked back at him with those amber brown eyes that held something older than patience. "Who trained you?" Jack said quietly. "And who sent you to me?" Outside, a car slowed on the street below. Jack's attention moved to the window. Automatic, trained reflex. The car didn't stop. Moved on. He tracked it by sound until it turned the corner. He looked back at the card. Then his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown number, he answered. Silence for a moment, then a voice. Low, filtered, possibly through some kind of scrambler. Male. "You found the caller. That means Chen's protocol worked." Jack was already on his feet, moving to the window, keeping his body off-center from the glass. "Who is this?" "Someone who needs you to understand that what you're holding is the reason 6 men died. And if you plug that card into anything before you know what you're doing, you will be the 7th. The line went dead. Axel was standing now, rigid, ears forward, pointed at the window. He'd heard something outside a full 2 seconds before Jack had registered the sound. On the street below, a silver sedan sat idling 30 yards from the building's entrance. No plates. Jack grabbed the SD card, moved to the kitchen, yanked the drawer open, and slid it behind the panel he'd installed in the 3rd week of living here, because old habits don't disappear. They just go quiet. He closed the drawer, put the collar back on Axel, killed the apartment lights. Then he crouched down next to the dog in the dark and looked at him. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a breath. "You and me. What do you know that I don't?" Axel's eyes caught the streetlight bleeding through the blinds. The dog looked at the door. Then he looked at Jack. And he didn't move. Because a trained military working dog knows that you don't break cover until your partner gives the signal. Jack's hands were calm. His breathing was even. But somewhere beneath the stillness, something that had been dead for 8 months had just switched back on. The mission was live. And whatever David Chen had hidden in that collar, whoever David Chen was, the men who'd killed Jack's team hadn't buried everything. They'd missed the dog. The sedan didn't move for 11 minutes. Jack counted them from the corner of the window frame, back flat against the wall. Axel a dark shape beside him on the floor. The dog wasn't trembling, wasn't whining. He was doing the same thing Jack was doing, waiting, reading, processing. His breathing was slow and deliberate, and every 30 seconds or so his ears would rotate slightly, tracking sounds Jack's human hearing couldn't reach. At minute 11, the sedan's brake lights flared and it pulled away from the curb. Smooth, unhurried, like the driver had simply been sitting there waiting for a parking spot and given up. Jack watched it until the taillights disappeared around the corner and then watched the space where it had been for another 2 minutes. Then he let out a breath and sat down on the floor. Axel immediately shifted and pressed his shoulder against Jack's knee. Not needy, steadying. Jack looked at the ceiling. The apartment felt different now. The same 4 walls, the same water stain above the bathroom door, the same crack in the corner baseboard he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. But all of it tilted slightly off-axis, like furniture moved 2 inches while you were sleeping. Familiar and wrong at the same time. He'd felt this before. The moment before a mission went kinetic, when the intelligence shifted and the environment reclassified itself from neutral to hostile, and your whole nervous system recalibrated without asking your permission. He hadn't felt it in 8 months. He hadn't missed it. But his hands were steady and his mind was moving in clean, straight lines for the first time since Coronado. and he hated how much easier that felt than everything else. He pulled out his phone, looked at the call log. Unknown number, no callback possible. He thought about calling Steph, his reintegration coordinator, and almost laughed at himself. He thought about calling the number on the back of the VA pamphlet. He thought about the man in the suit who'd shaken his hand in the windowless room and told him that nothing had happened, and felt something cold and specific settle in his chest. He wasn't calling anyone tonight. He reached under the kitchen drawer panel and took the SD card out again, held it in the light. 12 gigabytes of storage on a card the size of his thumbnail. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to hide this in a dead dog's collar. Not a dead dog, he corrected himself, looking at Axel, in a retired military working dog's collar, and then send that dog through a system designed to lose things, banking on the possibility that the right person would find him. The voice on the phone had said Chen's protocol worked. Chen. A name. Not a rank, not a call sign. A name offered deliberately, which meant it was either a trap or a trust fall. Jack had never heard the name David Chen in connection with the Syria mission. But the Syria mission, officially, had involved no CIA assets, no interagency coordination, no personnel outside his 8-man SEAL element. The Syria mission, officially, was a training exercise gone wrong. If Chen had been there, if someone had been operating in that space without Jack's knowledge, embedded in the same AO, running a parallel track, then the mission had been even more compromised than Jack understood. And the question wasn't just who had ordered the ambush. The question was why a CIA operative had chosen to encode his final intelligence package in the collar of a military dog and send it looking for a surviving SEAL. Why Jack specifically? He turned the card over in his hand. Because I was the only one who came back, he thought. And whoever Chen was, he'd known the others wouldn't. That thought sat in his stomach like a stone. He needed to read whatever was on that card. He needed a device that wasn't connected to any network he'd touched before, a location that wasn't this apartment, and someone he trusted at his back while he did it. The network security part he could manage. There was an electronics shop in Barrio Logan that did cash-only transactions and didn't ask questions, and Jack still had the technical training from his SIGINT rotations that most people didn't know he had. The location was solvable. The someone he trusted was harder. He thought about Marcus. But Marcus Reeves was the other man who'd made it out of Al-Hasaka alive. They'd never talked about it. Not really. They'd sat together in the debrief for parts of it, said what they had to say in front of the man in the suit, and then Marcus had shipped out to a medical evaluation facility in Bethesda, and Jack had gone back to Coronado, and they'd exchanged exactly 4 text messages in 8 months. The most recent one had been 3 months ago. Marcus had sent, "You good?" And Jack had replied, "Yeah," and that had been that. It was the kind of friendship that didn't require words to be real. It was also the kind of friendship that had been carefully avoided, because both of them understood, without saying so, that talking to each other meant talking about it, and neither of them was ready for that. Jack pulled up Marcus's contact, looked at it for a long moment. He typed, "Need to see you, not a social call. Call me when you're alone." Axel had moved while he was typing. The dog was at the bedroom door now, looking back at him with an expression Jack was starting to read as we should sleep. "You're probably right," Jack said. He took the SD card, wrapped it back in the electrical tape, and put it in the zippered inner pocket of his plate carrier, which lived in the closet because old habits, and then he lay down on top of the covers fully dressed with his phone on the nightstand and the Sig Sauer P226 on the other side of it. Axel jumped up on the foot of the bed, turned twice, and lay down. Jack closed his eyes. He didn't expect to sleep. He slept for 5 hours straight, deeper and harder than he had in 8 months. And when his eyes opened at 04:30, it wasn't from a nightmare. It was from Axel, who was standing on the bed with every muscle locked, pointed at the front door, not making a sound. Jack was up and moving before he was fully conscious, the SIG in his hand, back against the hallway wall, because 12 years of training will do that for you, will wire the response so deep in the nervous system that it fires before thought. He heard it then. What Axel had heard 40 seconds earlier, footsteps in the stairwell. Not the building's residents, he'd memorized the sounds of this place, The way the third step from the top creaked under Mrs. Peterson's morning newspaper run, the hollow echo of the guy in 3B who always took the stairs two at a time. These were different. Controlled. Heel to toe, weight distributed deliberately. The gait of someone trying not to be heard. At least 2 sets. Jack moved back to the bedroom, pulled on shoes, grabbed the plate carrier and had it on in 8 seconds, grabbed the dump bag from the closet shelf. It had been packed for 8 months. Another old habit, cash, documents, a burner phone he rotated monthly, a secondary mag, a folding knife, the kind of bag that military people call a go bag and civilians call paranoia, and came back to the hallway. The footsteps had stopped outside his door. Axel was beside him. No command given, just there. Jack looked at the dog. The dog looked at the door. There was a service exit at the end of the hallway. Maintenance access. Led to the alley behind the building. Jack had identified it his first week in the apartment. He had a key because he'd asked the building manager for one, using a story about a phobia of elevators that wasn't entirely fabricated. He moved to the window, cracked the blind with one finger. The street below was empty. If there was a second team, they were either inside or around back. He couldn't confirm the alley without exposure. 2 bad options. A soft, almost inaudible sound at the door. Metal on metal. They were working the lock. They were good at it. Not kicking it in. That was noise and commitment. They were picking it, which meant they wanted entry without announcement, which meant they weren't law enforcement and they weren't trying to make an arrest. Law enforcement announced. These people wanted silence. Jack made a decision. He moved to the front door, put his hand on the knob, and waited. Axel pressed against his left leg and went completely still. The moment he felt the lock give, the slight rotation of the knob from the other side, he yanked the door open and moved into the hallway simultaneously, low and hard, inside the threshold before they could react. There were 2 of them. Private contractors. His brain categorized instantly. Not military posture, not federal agent suit and tie, but the specific athletic casual of men paid by someone else's military budget to operate outside oversight. The first one had a pick set in his right hand and hadn't processed what was happening yet. The second one was fast, already bringing up a compact Glock from a chest rig, but Jack was already inside his reach, left hand redirecting the weapon arm upward, right elbow connecting with the man's jaw in a short, economical strike that snapped his head back into the hallway wall. The first man dropped the pick set and reached for something at his waist, and Axel hit him. The dog moved like a projectile. 65 pounds of trained aggression connecting at the man's right arm before the hand cleared his jacket, driving him back and down. Axel's grip was textbook. Target the weapon arm, lock on, and pin. The man made a sound that echoed in the stairwell and stopped moving. The second contractor was down, dazed. Jack put his knee in the man's back, wrist-locked both arms, and took the Glock. 11 seconds, start to finish. He was breathing harder than he should have been. His knee, the reconstructed one, sent a pulse of pain up his left leg that he filed away and ignored. "Who sent you?" he said. Not a question. A notification that an answer was expected. The man was quiet. "I broke 3 of your buddy's ribs," Jack said, which wasn't true but also possibly was. He hadn't been careful. "I'm going to ask one more time." Nothing. Axel released the first man on some internal signal and moved to position himself between the stairwell and the door. Watching the stairs, still working. Jack took the man's wallet, his phone, his earpiece, and the secondary weapon at his ankle. He dropped the wallet contents on the floor. No ID, credit cards and generic names, a folded piece of paper with Jack's building address, apartment number, and the handwritten notation confirmed then extract. He took the earpiece, put it in his own ear, static. Then a voice. "Status, confirm. Team 1, status." He left them zip-tied with their own equipment. They'd both been carrying flex cuffs, which told him something about their intentions, and took the stairs down and out through the maintenance exit into the alley. Axel moved beside him without a lead, tight on his left, matching his pace through the dark. The alley was empty. They walked 3 blocks north before Jack flagged a cab, not an app, cash, paid the driver twice the fare to take him to a neighborhood in National City where he knew no one and the cameras were sparse. In the back seat, with the city moving past the window and Axel sitting alert beside him, Jack put the earpiece back in. The channel had gone silent. They'd burned the frequency the moment Team 1 went dark. But in the seconds before it cut, he'd caught one more transmission. 2 words from a third voice, calm and authoritative, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Clean it. Marcus called back at 0630 from a number Jack didn't recognize, which told him Marcus had been careful, which told him Marcus had been waiting for something like this, even if he hadn't admitted it to himself. "Where are you?" Jack said. "Camp Pendleton, off-base housing." A pause. "You sound like you've been running." "I've had a morning." "What kind of morning?" "The kind that requires a conversation I can't have on this phone." Silence. The specific silence of a man recalculating his day. Marcus had a girlfriend, Jack remembered, an apartment, a consulting job with a defense contractor that probably paid well and required him to maintain his clearance and absolutely not do anything that would attract scrutiny. "How urgent," Marcus said. "2 contractors in my stairwell, urgent." Another pause. Longer. "Syria urgent?" "Yes." He heard Marcus exhale through his nose. "There's a diner on Palm Avenue in Imperial Beach. Lou's. You know it?" "I'll find it." 2 hours, come in from the south. And Jack..." He stopped. "Yeah." "Don't bring your vehicle." "Already ahead of you." He hung up. Axel had been watching his face the whole conversation, and when Jack put the phone away, the dog made a low sound in his chest. Not a growl, something more like acknowledgement, and shifted closer. Jack scratched behind his ear once. "We're going to meet someone. He's going to have a lot of questions." The dog said nothing, which Jack was beginning to find appropriate. So, Lou's diner smelled like burned coffee and old upholstery and someone's breakfast order involving eggs and something with excessive pepper. It was the kind of place that had been there since the 80s and would still be there when everything around it had been torn down and rebuilt twice. The booths were red vinyl repaired with electrical tape. The coffee came in mugs that had outlasted multiple administrations. Marcus was already there when Jack arrived, in a corner booth with his back to the wall and a clear sightline to both the entrance and the parking lot window. Old habits, same school. He looked different than Jack remembered from before Syria. Thicker through the shoulders somehow, but also hollowed out around the eyes in a way that didn't come from weight loss. He was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt and civilian jeans and looked completely ordinary if you didn't know what to look for. He looked at Axel and raised an eyebrow. "Military dog," Jack said, sliding in across from him. "I can see that." Marcus looked at the dog for a moment with an expression Jack couldn't fully read. "What's his story?" "That's part of what I need to tell you." A waitress materialized, poured coffee without being asked, left menus neither of them touched. When she was gone, Jack put the SD card on the table between them. Marcus looked at it, didn't touch it. "Where did that come from?" "His collar." Jack nodded at Axel. "Hidden compartment. Inside a section of the lining, sewn in." "Who put it there?" "Someone named David Chen." He watched Marcus's face. Something moved across it, a flicker, quick and controlled, but Marcus had never been quite as good at locking down his tells as he thought he was. The name registered. It registered clearly. "You know that name," Jack said. It wasn't a question this time either. Marcus picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking from it. "How much do you know, Ye?" he said. "I know the authentication code written on the tape is our unit's internal call sign. I know someone sent 2 contractors to my apartment this morning with flex cuffs and a note that said, 'Confirm then extract.' I know whatever is on this card made a CIA operative trust a dog to deliver it because he didn't trust any other method." Jack leaned forward slightly. "And I know you just recognized the name, which means you've been sitting on something for 8 months while I've been staring at my ceiling." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Palm Avenue and the window vibrated slightly in its frame. "I met Chen once," Marcus said finally. 6 weeks before Syria. A contact I wasn't supposed to have. A meeting that wasn't supposed to happen. He reached out through a mutual source. He said he had intelligence suggesting the operation we were being prepped for had been internally compromised. He said he couldn't go through official channels because the compromise went too high. He paused. I reported the meeting to Torres. Jack went very still. Torres told me to disregard it. Said Chen was known for... Marcus made a gesture, a small, frustrated movement of his hand. For running his own agenda, building his own networks, that he'd been flagged internally for operating outside his mandate. Torres said the operation was clean and Chen was a loose end trying to make himself relevant. And you believed him. Torres was my CO. And 6 of us died. The words landed flat and hard on the table between them. Marcus didn't flinch. He absorbed it the way you absorb something you've been waiting for someone else to say out loud. Because you've been saying it to yourself in the dark for 8 months and couldn't make yourself stop. Yeah, Marcus said. 6 of us died. The waitress came back and refilled their coffee. Neither of them spoke until she left. Torres might have genuinely believed Chen was compromised, Jack said, because he was trying to be fair, because Torres was dead, because speaking ill of the dead without evidence was a thing he tried not to do. Or Torres knew exactly what Chen was saying and made sure it didn't go anywhere. Or someone above Torres made that decision and used him to relay it. Marcus looked at the SD card. That would tell us which. We need a clean device. Air-gapped. Somewhere, no one is watching. I have a laptop at the apartment that's never been on a network. Bought it cash. Old habit. Old habit, Jack agreed. Marcus picked up the SD card, then turned it over in his fingers and looked at it the way you look at something you know is going to change the shape of your life. Not afraid exactly, more like resigned, like standing at the top of a drop and knowing you're already committed. Chen's dead, Marcus said. Not a question. I think so, yeah. Then we owe him a read. He pocketed the card. Jack felt the tension in his shoulders shift into something different. Not less, but more purposeful. They left cash on the table, neither of them having eaten anything, and walked out into the gray San Diego morning. Axel fell into step on Jack's left without being directed. Marcus watched the dog move. He's not retired, he said. No. He's been waiting. Yeah. Jack didn't elaborate. They'd gone half a block when Marcus stopped and said quietly, Jack, before we do this, he turned to face him directly, and there was something honest and uncomfortable in his face, the expression of a man choosing between convenient and true. I should have told you about Chen before Syria. I made a call, and it was wrong, and I've been living with that. Jack looked at him. There were a dozen things he could have said, a dozen reactions that would have been understandable. He thought about Kowalski's arm over him in a drainage ditch. He thought about Park, who had a daughter he'd never mentioned in briefings but whose photo he'd kept inside his helmet cover. He thought about the man in the suit shaking his hand. Tell me after we read the card, Jack said. Marcus held his gaze, nodded once. They kept walking. 3 blocks behind them, a black SUV that had been parked at the far end of the lot pulled smoothly out of its space and began to follow at a distance of exactly 400 meters, unhurried and patient. The way a predator follows prey, it knows it doesn't need to rush. Axel's ears rotated once toward it. He didn't alert. Not yet. But he had marked it. Marcus's apartment was 12 minutes from the diner, a ground floor unit in a complex that backed up to a drainage easement. Not glamorous, but it had 2 exit routes and no cameras in the parking lot, which Jack suspected was not a coincidence. Marcus had chosen it the same way Jack had chosen his apartment. The same way operators chose everything in civilian life, tactically, quietly, without explaining the reasoning to anyone who asked. The black SUV was still behind them. Jack had confirmed it twice during the drive, once at a light on Palm Avenue, where it held back an extra beat before accelerating, and once when Marcus took a deliberate wrong turn down a side street and the SUV appeared a block back 30 seconds later. Professional follow. 2-car rotation would have been better, but they were either understaffed or confident. Neither option was comforting. We've got a tail, Jack said. Marcus didn't look in the mirror. Black SUV, been on us since the diner. You made it too. About a block after you did. A pause. They're not trying to hide it. No. That was the part that bothered Jack most. A professional surveillance team that wanted to remain undetected could have managed it in this traffic. These people weren't hiding. They were present, visible enough to register, close enough to communicate that they knew where Jack and Marcus were, and they wanted Jack and Marcus to know it. It was a pressure tactic, a reminder, a hand on the shoulder that said, "We're here, we're watching, make the right choice." The right choice, in their framing, being whatever choice made the SD card disappear. Marcus pulled into the complex lot. The SUV continued past the entrance without turning in. Jack watched it go through the side mirror. "They're not following us in," Marcus said. "They don't need to. They know where you live." Marcus was quiet with that for a moment. Then he got out of the car and walked toward his apartment, and Jack followed him, and Axel walked between them with his ears rotating in a slow, continuous sweep. The laptop was in a duffel bag in the closet, still in its original box inside the bag. Marcus's version of careful was thorough. He set it on the kitchen table and powered it up while Jack stood at the window watching the street. And Axel took up position near the front door in the same way he'd stationed himself in Jack's apartment, same geometry, same self-assigned post. "You ever think about how weird it is," Marcus said, not looking up from the screen, "that we both live like this? Bag in the closet, car always pointed toward the exit, never more than one lock between us, and a door we can open fast." I try not to think about it. "Yeah." He inserted the SD card into the reader. "Me either." The card's directory appeared on screen, 47 files, audio recordings, compressed video files, and 3 document folders. The documents were labeled by date rather than subject, going back 18 months, well before the Syria operation. The audio files were labeled with initials Jack didn't recognize except for one. VCE7. Victor Charlie Echo 7. A designator he knew from interagency joint briefings, the kind of briefings where everyone in the room had code names and nobody introduced themselves by real name. VCE7 was the designator for the JSOC liaison to the intelligence community, the officer who sat between Special Operations Command and the CIA's Special Activities Center and made sure the two entities coordinated without either one knowing more about the other than absolutely necessary. Jack had been in one room with VCE7 exactly once, 18 months ago, during a pre-deployment coordination meeting for a series of operations across northeastern Syria. He hadn't known the man's real name, still didn't, but he remembered the voice. "Play VCE7, he said. Marcus clicked on the file. The audio opened mid-conversation, no preamble, as though Chen had been recording for some time before the significant exchange began. The quality was clean, close-range capture, probably a device on Chen's person, good equipment. A voice, the VCE7 voice. Jack recognized it immediately. Flat, mid-Atlantic accent, the particular measured cadence of someone who'd spent a career choosing words the way a surgeon chose instruments. The seal element is the problem. They're scheduled to pass through grid Delta 7 on the 14th. That window overlaps with the transfer. A second voice. Older, rougher. Jack didn't recognize it yet. Then we change the window. We can't. The buyers don't move their timeline for operational concerns. You know that. Then we change the seal element's timeline. We can't do that either without raising flags at the squadron level. A pause. The sound of something. A drink being set down, maybe. A chair. Then the seal element has a bad night, the second voice said. And we document it as an ambush. The area is contested enough. No one will look hard. Jack's hand had closed around the edge of the table without him noticing. Marcus had gone completely still beside him. The recording continued. Logistics, contractor contacts, a reference to a transit route, and a payment structure that involved numbers large enough to be abstract. And then, near the end, the second voice said something that put a name to itself without meaning to. A reference to a meeting the following week aboard the USS Kerrigan, which was the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer that had served as the command platform for naval operations in that sector. A platform with extremely limited access, the kind of access that required flag-level authority. The recording ended. Marcus sat back in his chair. He looked at his own hands on the table for a moment like he didn't fully recognize them. Flag-level authority, Jack said. Yeah. The second voice. I know. You recognize it. Marcus looked up. His face was doing something complicated. The expression of a man who'd spent months constructing a wall between what he suspected and what he could prove, and watching the wall come down brick by brick in real time. Admiral Richard Vance, Marcus said. SOCOM Strategic Integration. He was the oversight authority for our operational group in Syria. He stopped. He signed our deployment orders. The kitchen felt smaller. Jack was aware of his own breathing, the refrigerator's hum, traffic outside, Axel's nails on the floor as the dog shifted weight, small sounds filling a very large silence. Vance didn't just let it happen, Jack said. No. He ordered it. Yes. He ordered the death of 6 United States Navy SEALs to protect a weapons deal. Marcus didn't answer that. There was no version of answering that wasn't just repeating back what they'd both heard with their own ears. He reached over and opened the second audio file. Chen's voice this time. Alone. Speaking the way someone speaks when they believe they might not get another opportunity. Not panicked, but deliberate. The voice of a man making a record. This is David Chen, Special Activities Center, NOC designation Kestrel. If this recording has been accessed, I am likely dead. The preceding files document approximately 14 months of intelligence collection on a conspiracy involving illegal arms transfers orchestrated through a classified logistics network established under SOCOM Strategic Integration. The primary architect of this conspiracy is Admiral Richard Vance. Secondary participants include, he named 4 names. Jack didn't recognize all of them, but 2 he did. A Senate Armed Services Committee staffer with oversight access to special operations funding, and a defense contractor CEO whose company had provided airlift support for multiple operations in the region. I attempted to route this intelligence through official CIA channels 3 times. Each attempt was redirected or suppressed. I made contact with one member of the SEAL element prior to the operation. I was unable to prevent what followed. I intend to use the only secure channel remaining to me. A pause. His name is Axel. He was assigned to my operational unit for the final months of my deployment. He is the best partner I have ever worked with, and I am trusting him to do what I cannot. The recording ended. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, a car alarm went off 2 blocks away, and then stopped. He knew he was going to die, Marcus said. He went anyway. He hid the card in a dog collar and hoped the dog would end up with the right person. And the dog ended up with the right person. Marcus looked at Axel. The German Shepherd looked back at him with those amber-brown eyes, steady and patient and carrying something that wasn't quite grief but was in the same neighborhood. Okay, Marcus said. He said it quietly, not to Jack, not to the dog, just out. Into the room, an acknowledgement. Then he straightened in his chair and his face went to the expression Jack recognized from the field, the one that meant the time for processing was over and it was time to work. What do we do with it? We can't go official, Jack said. Vance has reach into JAG, into the IG's office, into every channel Chen already tried. Right. So we go unofficial. We go to someone who can't be pressured. Jack had been thinking about this since the diner, running names, cutting names, running them again. Investigative journalists. Not a single outlet. Distributed. We get copies of these files to enough independent investigators simultaneously that no single suppression order can catch all of them. That's a leak. That's an understatement. We go to prison for that. Vance goes to prison for that. We go to federal court and maybe eventually don't go to prison if we're lucky and the evidence is airtight. Is it airtight? Jack looked at the screen. 14 months of documentation, audio records of a conspiracy to murder American service members, a CIA operative's sworn testimony. It's as close as we're going to get. Marcus drummed his fingers on the table once. Stopped. We need a physical evidence cache. Somewhere these files exist independent of any device that can be remotely wiped. Chen mentioned something in the final document folder, Jack said. He'd scanned it while Marcus was listening to the audio. There's a set of coordinates. Pacific coastline, about 40 miles south of here. He turned the laptop so Marcus could see the screen. With a note that says final cache, physical evidence, Analog, backup. Chen apparently wasn't relying entirely on the digital files. Marcus looked at the coordinates. Baja? That's across the border. North of the border by about 2 miles. Jack had already pulled up a map in his head. The coastline south of San Diego was a mix of state parkland, old coastal installations, and a few abandoned structures from the Cold War era. There's a decommissioned Coast Guard lighthouse at this position. Fell out of service in the 90s. The site was never sold, just mothballed. Chen hid physical evidence in an abandoned lighthouse. Chen hid physical evidence in the least monitored, most defensible, most isolated structure in the region. Marcus looked at him. You're not wrong. That's exactly what I'd do. They started moving. Well, the problem with moving was the SUV. It had reappeared, different position, same vehicle, on the street outside the complex by the time Jack came back to the window to check. Parked now. Engine off. The tinted windshield gave him nothing about how many people were inside. They're going to follow us to the lighthouse, Marcus said. Yes. We could try to lose them. In your vehicle, which they've already tagged, in a city they probably have additional units in. Jack shook his head. Losing them in a chase just tells them we know where we're going. What's the alternative? We move like we're not going anywhere important. Jack pulled out his phone. And we call in a distraction. The distraction was Jack's neighbor in 3B, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Walt Okafor, no relation to the therapist, who Jack had helped move a couch up 3 flights of stairs 6 months ago, and who had since become the closest thing Jack had to a friend in the building. Walt was 62, walked with a cane from a Fallujah injury, drove a loud red pickup, and had a personality like a pressure washer. Jack called him. Walt? Jack, kinda early. I need a favor. I need you to drive somewhere for me. Doesn't matter where, just drive. Make it look like you're going somewhere with purpose. I'll explain later. A pause. The pause of a former Marine who'd spent 30 years not asking unnecessary questions. You in trouble? Some people are watching my building, and I need them to watch the wrong thing. Copy that. Give me 10 minutes. Walt's red pickup left the complex lot 11 minutes later, heading north. The black SUV pulled out 40 seconds after him. Jack watched from the window. That buys us maybe 15 minutes before they figure it out, Marcus said. 12, Jack said. Walt drives fast. They went out the back. Marcus had a second vehicle, a borrowed truck from a contractor friend, not registered in his name, parked in a storage lot 2 blocks east. This was the paranoid redundancy that Jack had thought was excessive when Marcus mentioned it once in passing, 6 months ago, in a context he couldn't even remember. He didn't think it was excessive now. They drove south. The coast road was clear. The morning had gone overcast, a marine layer pressing down low over the water, flattening the light and turning everything gray and even. The kind of weather that made distances hard to judge and made you feel slightly outside of time. Jack rode with the files copied onto 2 additional micro SD cards, each in separate pockets, and the original back in Axel's collar. A redundancy that felt appropriate. Marcus drove without the radio on. Axel sat in the back seat and watched the road behind them with the systematic attention of a trained rear security element. When we get to the lighthouse, Marcus said, after about 15 minutes of quiet, what exactly are we looking for? Chen said physical evidence. That could be anything. He was a field operative who knew his digital files could be wiped or intercepted. Physical means printed documents, maybe hard copies of financial records, photographs, correspondence, things that exist outside of any network. Hard to destroy remotely. Right. And if he cached them at a physical site tied to those coordinates, he built in a dead man's protocol. If he never went back to retrieve them, the evidence stays there, waiting. Waiting for whoever had the card. Whoever had Axel. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's a hell of a lot of trust to put in a dog. He knew the dog, Jack said. He didn't know who the dog would find. He was betting on the dog's judgment. And the dog found you. The dog found me. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You believe in that? I believe Axel walked past 40 other people in that shelter and sat down in front of me. That's not an answer. That's the only answer I've got. The lighthouse appeared on the headland above the coastal road as they rounded the last curve before the access trail. A white tower, maybe 60 feet, with a keeper's house attached at the base, both structures showing the specific deterioration of things maintained by no one for decades. Paint peeling in long strips, windows clouded with salt residue. The iron railing on the lantern gallery had pulled away from the concrete in two places and hung at a slight angle against the sky. Marcus pulled off the road onto a dirt track and killed the engine. They sat for a moment. Chen picked his spot, Marcus said. Chen picked his spot, Jack agreed. They got out. The wind off the water was cold and direct and smelled like salt and wet stone. Axel jumped down from the back seat and his nose went immediately to work, quartering the ground in front of the structure in a tight pattern, reading the scene. Then he stopped, both ears up. Weight forward, his whole body pointing at the keeper's house. Jack's hand went to his hip. Someone's been here, Marcus said, reading the dog the same way Jack was. Recently, Jack said. How recently? Axel looked back at Jack once, not the look of a dog that needed direction, but the look of a partner confirming they were on the same page, and then moved toward the keeper's house door at a controlled trot. The door was unlocked. Not forced, not broken. Unlocked. Either Chen had left it that way, or someone else had opened it and hadn't bothered to relock it, because they were either still inside or they'd been in a hurry. Jack pushed it open and went in low. The inside of the keeper's house was dim and smelled of mildew and old wood and something else, motor oil faintly. The furnishings that had been here during the lighthouse's operational life were long gone, leaving only a warped wooden floor, a stone fireplace with a collapsed flue damper, and in the corner near the base of the stairs leading up into the tower, a waterproof equipment case. Military grade. OD green. The kind of case that could survive saltwater immersion and a 2-story drop. Beside it, something Jack had not expected. A man. Seated on the floor with his back against the wall, knees up, hands resting on them, watching the door with the exhausted stillness of someone who'd been waiting for an unknown amount of time and had made peace with the uncertainty. Late 30s, maybe 40. Asian American, lean, a beard that had grown in during what looked like weeks of limited maintenance, a bandage wrapped around his left forearm, old blood dried brown at the edges. He looked at Jack, then at Marcus, then at Axel. When he saw the dog, something in his face broke open and then immediately closed again, the way a man's face moves when he refuses to let himself react in front of strangers. Axel, he said. One word, just the name. The dog crossed the room in 4 strides and pressed his entire body against the man's side, and the man put both arms around the dog's neck and held on without making a sound. Jack and Marcus stood in the doorway. David Chen, Jack said. The man looked up. You read the files. We read the files. Chen loosened his grip on Axel. The dog stayed pressed against him but turned to watch the door. Still working, even now. I couldn't go back through official channels. They had a flag on my NOC. Every time I tried to surface, I had to go back under within 48 hours. He looked at his bandaged arm without explaining it. I've been here for 6 days. You're alive, Marcus said. His voice was flat in a way Jack recognized, the flatness of someone managing a reaction they hadn't prepared for. Marginally. The recordings, Vance's voice, is on 17 separate audio files across 4 devices, all of which are in that case. Chen looked at the equipment case in the corner. Along with financial documentation, transaction records, and photographs from 3 separate arms transfers, enough to put Vance and everyone connected to him in a federal courtroom. Who else knows you're here? No one. The people who were following us this morning? Vance's contractor network. They know about me. They've known for about 3 weeks. They've been trying to close the loop. He said it with the matter-of-fact flatness of a man who'd been hunted for long enough that the fact of being hunted had stopped feeling remarkable. They don't know about this location. I made sure of that. But they will figure it out eventually. They have resources. How long do we have? Jack said. Chen thought about it. I've been here 6 days and they haven't found me. I'd estimate... He stopped talking. Axel had come off Chen and moved to the window in one fluid motion, every muscle hard, nose at the gap in the clouded glass, ears pinned forward. Outside, on the dirt track that led to the lighthouse road, headlights appeared, Not one vehicle, 3. Moving fast, no attempt at quiet. The specific aggressive approach of people who'd stopped caring whether you knew they were coming because they'd made the calculation that it didn't matter anymore. Marcus was already at the equipment case, hands on the latches. How do we get out? Jack moved to the door and looked up the stairs toward the tower. Then at Chen. You said you've been here 6 days. You know this building. There's a maintenance hatch on the north face of the tower about 40 feet up, access ladder on the exterior. It drops to a ledge above the rocks. How far is the drop from the ledge? 12 feet, into water at high tide, rocks at low. Jack looked at his watch. What's the tide right now? Chen looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between grim and something that almost had humor in it. I genuinely don't know, Chen said. I've been eating protein bars for 6 days and sleeping on a floor. Outside, the first vehicle stopped 30 yards from the keeper's house. Doors opened. Axel turned from the window and looked at Jack. And in the flat gray light coming through the salt-clouded glass, surrounded by the sound of boots on gravel and the cold smell of the ocean and the weight of everything on that SD card, Jack felt something finalize in his chest. A decision that wasn't really a decision because it had already been made the moment he opened the door to Kennel 47, and a broken soldier of a dog had walked out and sat down in front of him like he'd been waiting for exactly this. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. Same as always, Marcus said. Same as always, Jack agreed. He moved to the base of the stairs, checked the Glock he'd taken from the contractor in his stairwell, 11 rounds, 1 in the chamber, and started up toward the tower while behind him he heard the first knock on the keeper's house door that was polite in the way that things are polite when the person doing them knows the politeness is temporary. Axel was already ahead of him on the stairs, moving up into the dark, leading the way into whatever came next. The knock came again, 3 times, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that was a formality and everyone in the building knew it. Jack was already 12 steps up the tower staircase, moving fast, the Glock in his right hand and his left trailing the stone wall for balance in the dark. The stairs were iron, original to the structure, and they rang faintly under his weight, no matter how carefully he placed his feet. Axel was ahead of him, the dog's nails finding grip on the metal treads with the practiced ease of an animal that had climbed worse things. Below, he heard the keeper's house door open. Not broken in. Opened. Which meant Chen had opened it, which was either a catastrophically bad decision or a tactical one, and Jack didn't have the angle to know which yet. He stopped at the first landing, pressed against the curved wall, and listened. A voice from below. Male, professional, carrying the particular flatness of someone reading from a script they'd used before. Mr. Chen, my name is Garrett. I've been authorized to offer you a resolution. Chen's voice, dry as paper. A resolution, that's a new word for it. The people I represent understand that you've been operating under significant stress. They want to find a path forward that doesn't require what? Doesn't require me to be a loose end? A pause. The files, Mr. Chen, that's all this is about. Then you should talk to the dog. Jack almost smiled. Almost. He kept moving up. The tower's interior was a column of cold salt air and peeling paint and the faint smell of old machinery. The lighthouse mechanism had been removed decades ago, leaving just the iron stairs spiraling up through empty space to the lantern room at the top. Jack came through the hatch into the lantern room and immediately went to the floor, below the level of the glass panels that encircled the space on all sides. He came up slowly at the edge of a panel and looked out. The 3 vehicles were parked on the track below, 2 black SUVs and 1 gray panel van. He counted 4 figures outside, 2 by the vehicles, 1 at the corner of the keeper's house watching the seaward side, and 1 who'd apparently gone inside with Chen. The 2 by the vehicles were armed, rifles slung, the posture of men waiting for a signal rather than engaged. Marcus appeared through the hatch behind him, the equipment case in one hand, breathing harder than he wanted to show. Jack held up 4 fingers. Marcus looked out, confirmed the count, and held up 1 more finger, pointing down, indicating the man inside with Chen, 5 total. Jack looked at the north face of the building, toward the maintenance hatch Chen had described. He found it, a hinged metal panel set into the curved wall with an iron ladder bolted to the exterior stone below it. The The ladder ran down to a concrete ledge about 15 feet above the water. From here, the ocean was gray-green and moving, significant swells from the marine layer pushing in from the southwest. The tide question remained unanswered. "Can you get that case out the hatch?" Jack said low. "If I lose some skin off my knuckles?" "Yes." "Do it. Get Chen and get to the ledge." "What are you doing?" "Buying time." Marcus looked at him, the way he'd been looking at him for 12 years across various bad situations. The look that meant, "This is a terrible plan, and I know you know it, and we're doing it anyway." "How much time do you need?" Jack thought about the files, the audio, the 14 months of documentation that Chen had built at the cost of everything. He thought about journalists, investigators, the simultaneous distribution that made suppression impossible. He thought about the USB port on his phone, and the mobile data connection that he'd been careful to keep clean, and the list of contacts he'd built over 12 years of operations, people in legal, in press, in the oversight community, people who owed him nothing but who he'd trusted at critical moments, and who'd never been burned by that trust. He pulled out his phone. 20 minutes, he said. "Jack, there are 5 armed contractors. 19 minutes now." Marcus stared at him. Then he grabbed the equipment case and moved toward the maintenance hatch. Jack connected his phone to the SD card via the adapter he'd been carrying in his dump bag, because the same paranoid preparedness that kept a burner phone in his closet had also included a card reader adapter, because you plan for the thing you might need even when you didn't know you'd need it. He opened a compression app, bundled Chen's files into a single encrypted package, set the decryption key to a passphrase only he knew, and started building his distribution list. He had 14 contacts, investigative journalists at 4 different outlets, 2 national, 1 international, 1 independent, 3 congressional oversight staffers who'd made careers out of accountability work and had the institutional protection to survive a fight with a flag officer, 2 federal attorneys in different districts, a retired inspector general who'd left office under pressure and had been very public about why, 3 watchdog organizations with independent legal teams, and 1 woman at a wire service who'd broken 2 previous defense contractor scandals and whose phone Jack had been given by a source he trusted completely. He wrote a single message, 2 paragraphs. Factual, specific, no editorializing. It named Vance. It named the operation. It named the dead. It attached the file and the decryption key and included a note that read, "This will be sent to everyone on this list simultaneously. If any single recipient experiences suppression, the others will know why." He addressed it to all 14. Then he sat with his thumb over the send button and listened to the building below him. Chen and Garrett were still talking. He could hear the shape of it, but not the words. The acoustics of the tower bent sound strangely. He heard Chen's voice go up once, sharp, and then come back down. He heard a third voice join. One of the men outside had come in, which meant the perimeter was shrinking, which meant Garrett had made a decision. Jack heard footsteps on the iron stairs. He sent the files. All 14. Simultaneously. Gone into the network in a packet that would arrive in 14 different inboxes in the next 30 seconds, where it would be opened by 14 different people who had every institutional and professional incentive to act on it before anyone could tell them not to. He pocketed the phone, moved to the staircase opening, and waited. The man who came through it first was big, wide through the shoulders, tactical vest, a Glock 19 at his side that he brought up when he saw Jack. He was fast, but he came through the hatch opening committed to the angle he'd expected, which was the angle toward the maintenance hatch, and Jack wasn't there. Jack was beside the hatch opening, inside the man's reach before the Glock could track him, and the next 4 seconds were ugly and close and not cinematic at all. An elbow, a knee, the specific grinding unpleasantness of 2 people fighting in a space too small for either of them to generate any real power. And the reconstructed knee sent another pulse of white pain up Jack's left leg that made him lose half a second he couldn't afford. The man was good. He got a grip on Jack's collar and drove him back into the glass panel hard enough that it cracked. Original glass, lighthouse glass, thick and old. And Jack felt it bow, but not give. And he dropped his weight to break the grip and came up with a palm strike to the chin that was harder than intended and put the man down onto the iron floor with a sound like something heavy dropped on a ship deck. He wasn't unconscious. He was trying to get back up. Jack took his radio and his weapon and the zip tie from his vest pocket and made sure he wasn't getting up quickly, and then went to the maintenance hatch and threw it into the gray coastal air. The ladder was wet. Every rung was filmed with salt condensation and in places with actual moss, and the wind off the water made the iron vibrate slightly under his hands. He went down fast. Not careful, fast, because careful was a luxury he'd spent in the lantern room, and his knees screamed at him through every rung, and he told it to wait. He hit the ledge. Concrete, slick, about 4 feet wide, running along the base of the tower above the waterline. Marcus was there. Chen was there. Axel was there. The water below the ledge was moving, swells coming in and receding. At the trough of each swell, rocks showed, dark and irregular, just visible through the chop. "Tide's going out," Chen said, looking at the water. He'd been right that he didn't know. He was estimating now, reading the waterline marks on the stone. "How long until it's all rocks?" 30 minutes, maybe less." "Then we don't wait 30 minutes, Marcus said. Jack looked at the water, 12 feet down. The swells were running 4 to 5 feet, which meant, at the peak of a swell, the effective drop was 7 feet, maybe less. The rocks were visible between swells, not at their peak. The window was about 3 seconds per cycle. Swell comes in, rocks covered, you drop. "Chen," Jack said, "you swim?" "Better than I do most things right now." "Marcus." "Don't ask me that." "Equipment case. Is waterproof." "I know. I read the label." Marcus looked at the water, and then at Jack with the expression of a man who'd jumped out of aircraft and off bridges and into worse than this, and still never made peace with any of it. "You're going first." "I'll go first," Jack said. He looked at Axel. The dog looked at the water. Then at Jack. Then back at the water with the specific focus of an animal reading a physical problem. "He'll jump when I jump," Jack said. He didn't know how he knew that. He just knew. He watched the water, counted the rhythm, 4 seconds of swell, 3 seconds of trough. The pattern wasn't perfectly regular, but it was close enough. He picked a swell, let it pass, felt the next one building, and stepped off. The drop was fast, and cold was an understatement. The Pacific Ocean in February off the California coast is the kind of cold that doesn't feel like temperature. It feels like impact, like the whole surface of your skin registering a single simultaneous alarm. He went under, came up, and the swell pushed him sideways into the rock face before he could get his arms working properly. He took the impact on his right shoulder, not the bad one, small mercies, and pushed off and got clear of the base before the next swell could pin him again. He turned in the water to look up. Axel came off the ledge 2 seconds later, clean and straight, paws tucked, hit the water 6 feet to Jack's left and surfaced immediately, already swimming, those amber-brown eyes scanning for Jack with an expression of absolute focused calm. Chen came next, then Marcus, who made a sound on the way down that he would not have made in front of anyone who didn't already know him extremely well, and who came up sputtering and immediately looked around with the urgency of a man accounting for his team. "Case?" Jack said. Marcus raised it out of the water. "Case. Move." They swam. The coastal road was a 1/4 mile of rocks and seagrass and cold wind, and they walked it dripping and without speaking until Marcus found enough cell signal to call for transportation using a contact so deep in his off-the-books network that Jack didn't recognize the name. Chen was limping. Something wrong with his right ankle that he hadn't mentioned. A detail he delivered with the matter-of-fact brevity of a man who'd cataloged his own damage extensively enough that individual items had stopped warranting explanation. Axel walked beside Jack, coat soaked flat, and didn't appear to notice that he was wet and cold. He had his nose up, reading the wind, still working. A truck came for them 40 minutes later, driven by someone Marcus addressed as Sal, who asked no questions and drove them north without acknowledging that 3 of his passengers were soaking wet, and one of them was a German shepherd. The following 72 hours were the kind of hours that happened in pieces, without the coherent narrative structure that made time feel like something you were moving through intentionally. Jack experienced them in intervals, A motel room in Chula Vista, cash, Axel on the floor beside the bed, a phone that didn't stop. Journalists calling back, 3 within the first 6 hours, 7 by the end of the first day, all 14 within 48 hours. The encrypted files cracked open in newsrooms across the country, and the audio of Admiral Richard Vance's voice discussing the murder of American service members as an operational inconvenience started moving through the investigative press infrastructure with the momentum of something that couldn't be unheard. Chen did most of the talking. He was good at it. The practiced coherence of a man who'd spent months rehearsing this testimony in his own head against the possibility that he'd eventually get to give it. Jack sat in corners of rooms and let him talk, and Marcus handled the logistics of keeping them in locations that hadn't been compromised, cycling through contacts and safe houses with a methodical efficiency that Jack hadn't seen from him in 8 months. And that was quietly, privately, steadying to witness. The federal side moved faster than Jack expected. He'd assumed there would be friction, institutional reluctance, the slow grinding resistance of bureaucracies protecting themselves. There was some of that. There was also an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District named Holloway, who'd apparently been building a parallel file on Vance's contractor network for 6 months from a completely different angle and who, when Chen's files landed in her inbox from the wire service contact, called her supervisor, then her supervisor's supervisor, and then drove to the federal building at 11 o'clock at night and started drafting. Jack and Marcus were brought in for formal interviews on the 3rd day. The location was a federal building in downtown San Diego, a conference room on the 9th floor with gray carpet and institutional lighting and a long table at which sat 3 attorneys, 2 investigators from the DoD Inspector General's office, and a woman from the Senate Armed Services Committee who introduced herself by title rather than name and took notes by hand. The lead attorney was a man named Ferraro, 50s, reading glasses, the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been working this case around the clock and had stopped caring about his appearance somewhere around hour 30. He was competent and direct, and he'd clearly read Chen's files closely enough to ask specific questions. He started with Jack. Mr. Brennan, you were the surviving ranking member of the SEAL element that operated in Al-Hasaka province. Operation doesn't officially exist, Jack said. We're in a federal proceeding. It exists here. Then yes. You were the first to access the intelligence cached by Mr. Chen. I accessed the SD card. Marcus Reeves and I reviewed the content together. And the audio recordings. You recognize the voice you now identify as Admiral Vance's. I recognize the VCE-7 designator from the Coronado Coordination meeting 18 months ago. The voice matched. Ferraro looked at him over his glasses. You're certain? I spent 12 years learning to remember voices I might only hear once, in bad conditions, in the dark. Yes, I'm certain. The woman from the Armed Services Committee looked up from her notes. She was younger than her title implied. Mid-40s, sharp-faced, the specific kind of tired that came from sustained focus rather than lack of sleep. She said, Mr. Brennan, during your debrief after the Syria operation, were you given any indication that the mission had involved additional intelligence community assets? I was told the operation involved no assets outside my 8-man element. Who told you that? A man in a suit in a windowless room who showed me a government ID I wasn't allowed to photograph. A pause. Ferraro wrote something. No name was given, the woman said. No name was given, no agency identified, no business card offered. Standard deniability protocol. Jack looked at her directly. I assume your office knows who runs that kind of debrief? She held his gaze for a moment. We have some thoughts on that, yes. Then you probably also have thoughts on why a CIA operative's intelligence was suppressed 3 separate times before he had to put it in a dog collar. Another pause. Longer this time. Ferraro cleared his throat. The committee will... 6 men are dead, Jack said. Not raised, flat, precise, the tone of someone stating a coordinate. They've been dead for 8 months. Their families were told it was a training accident. Their names aren't on anything because the op doesn't exist. Before this goes any further in whatever direction it's going, I need to know those men are going to get on record. Real record, with their names. The room was quiet. "That's not within the scope of this," one of the other attorneys started. "It's within the scope of what I'm willing to cooperate with," Jack said. "I'm not a hostile witness. I want Vance in a courtroom. I want the whole structure of what he built dismantled in public. But I walked out of a drainage ditch in Syria because a 26-year-old kid from Pittsburgh put his body between me and a burst of fire that was meant for both of us, and his name is on a KIA summary that's classified above the level anyone in his family will ever be able to access. That changes before I sign anything." He put his hands flat on the table. They were steady. He noticed that. The woman from the Armed Services Committee looked at him for a long moment, the evaluating look of someone running calculations. Then she wrote something, tore the page off her legal pad, and slid it across the table to Ferraro. Ferraro read it, looked at Jack, looked at the woman. "We can discuss a parallel proceeding," he said. "We can discuss it now," Jack said. Vance was arrested on a Thursday morning, which Jack knew because Marcus texted him a news alert with no accompanying message, and Jack sat in the motel room with his coffee going cold and read the headline 3 times and didn't feel what he'd expected to feel. He'd expected something like relief or satisfaction, or the particular emotional resolution that happened in movies at this juncture, when the villain went down and the music swelled and you knew it was over. What he actually felt was tired and sad, in the specific way that you feel sad when justice arrives, and the people it was for aren't there to see it. He looked at Axel. The dog was watching him from the foot of the bed, doing the thing he did, reading Jack's face, reading his posture, taking the temperature of the room. "He's under arrest," Jack said. Axel's ears moved forward. "It doesn't bring them back." The dog stood, walked the length of the bed, and put his head in Jack's lap. Not asking for anything. Just present. The way he'd been present in the kennel, in the apartment, in the stairwell, on the ledge, in the water. Jack put his hand on the dog's head. Outside the window, the San Diego morning was doing what San Diego mornings did. The marine layer burning off slowly, the light coming through in the particular golden way it did when the city was just waking up and everything looked briefly, deceptively clean. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it with the specific wariness that unknown numbers had earned over the past week. The voice on the other end was the woman from the Armed Services Committee. "Mr. Brennan, the committee has approved a classified review of the Al-Hasaka operation under Section 8 of the Oversight Charter. That review will establish an official record, names, actions, circumstances. The families will be notified through appropriate channels within 30 days. Jack was quiet. "I want to be clear that this is not a concession," she said. "It's the right thing to do. It was always the right thing to do, and it should have been done 8 months ago." "Yes," Jack said. "It should have." Another pause. "Your cooperation throughout this process has been noted." "I wasn't cooperating with the process. I was cooperating with the truth." "There's not always a difference." In this case, there was. She was quiet for a moment, and he could hear her deciding something. "For what it's worth, Mr. Brennan, the people who did this weren't the institution. They were individuals who used the institution as cover." "I know that," Jack said. "I spent 12 years serving that institution. I know exactly what it is and what it isn't." He paused. "But when individuals can do what Vance did, for as long as he did it, and the institution keeps moving, that's not just bad people. That's a system that needs to look at itself." Silence. "Yes," she said. "It does." She hung up. Jack set the phone down. Axel lifted his head and looked at him. Jack scratched behind the dog's ear. The left one, the one with the scar where the fur had never grown back. And the dog closed his eyes briefly, the way dogs do when they're content, a slow blink that said something without words. In the bathroom, Marcus was on his own phone, the low, deliberate murmur of someone talking to a person who mattered and choosing words carefully. His girlfriend, probably. The conversation he'd been putting off for a week. Jack could hear the shape of it. Explanation, apology, the particular verbal navigation of someone trying to close a distance that hadn't been physical. From across the hall, he could hear Chen typing. The man had been writing a formal report continuously, in parallel with everything else, building the documented record of his 14 months of intelligence collection with the relentless thoroughness of someone who understood that the truth needed to be written down by the person who'd lived it, in their own words, before other people's versions took over. Jack drank his cold coffee. It tasted exactly like cold coffee in a styrofoam cup in a motel room in Chula Vista. Not like victory, not like resolution, like exactly what it was. And for the first time in 8 months, that felt like enough. 3 weeks after Vance's arrest, Jack went back to the shelter. Not for any particular reason he could articulate. He'd been back in his apartment for 10 days by then. The federal process had moved him through 2 more formal interviews, a deposition, a classified briefing that required him to sign 3 additional documents, and then released him into his own life with the anticlimactic abruptness of a system that had extracted what it needed and had no further use for his presence. He had groceries in the refrigerator for the first time in months. He'd fixed the baseboard. He'd called Walt and explained enough of what had happened that Walt had sat quietly for a long moment and then said, "I moved a couch up 3 flights of stairs for the right guy," and that had been the end of that conversation. He drove to the shelter on a Tuesday morning because he woke up at 4:30 and couldn't think of anywhere else that made sense. Carol was at the front desk. She looked up when he pushed through the door, and her expression did something complicated. Recognition, relief, a question she was deciding whether to ask. "You look worse than when you left," she said. "I've had a month." "The dog looks fine." Axel was beside him, clean and dry and considerably more present than he'd been at intake 8 months ago when he'd stood in the back of Kennel 47 and stopped trusting. He looked at Carol with the polite acknowledgement of someone who remembered her without being sentimental about it. "I came to talk to you about something," Jack said. "If you have a few minutes." She had a few minutes. The idea had started in the motel room, the morning after the arrest, while he was drinking cold coffee and watching Axel and thinking about David Chen's recorded voice saying he is the best partner I have ever worked with. It had taken shape in pieces over the following days, the way plans did when you had nothing else to do but think. In the car between locations, in the waiting rooms of federal buildings, in the quiet after Marcus went to bed, and Chen was still typing and Axel was settled at Jack's feet, running his slow breath in and out like a metronome. The system that had failed Axel, that had taken a military working dog off the line and run him through a placement process designed for animals without operational conditioning, then written him off when 3 families couldn't manage him. That same system failed roughly 500 military working dogs every year. Animals that had worked at the edge of human conflict, that had been trained to operate in environments that would break most humans, that came out the other side with the specific damage of sustained operational service, hypervigilance, broken trust protocols, grief that expressed itself as shutdown rather than aggression, and so got misread as aggression or obstinacy or untrainability. They got placed, or they got euthanized, or they sat in kennels for 8 months and stopped eating. Simultaneously, there were veterans, thousands of them, spread across the country, who were waking up at 04:30 and staring at ceilings and going to 3 sessions with therapists and stopping, not because the therapists were bad, but because the therapeutic model assumed a kind of verbal access to interior experience that combat didn't leave intact. Men and women who could function in a structured environment with a clear mission and fell apart in the absence of both, and who needed not a pamphlet, not a referral, not a stress ball, but a partner who understood operational conditioning the way they understood it, who communicated in the same nonverbal language of attention and proximity and shared vigilance, who needed something back from the relationship in a way that made the relationship feel real rather than clinical. Jack had not invented any of this. The research existed. The models existed in limited form at scattered programs around the country. What didn't exist was something systematic, something that treated military working dog retirement as a specialized transition requiring specialized placement, and matched that transition specifically to veterans in post-service crisis, rather than to civilian families who had no framework for what they were receiving. He explained all of this to Carol in the shelter's break room over bad coffee that was still better than the motels. She listened. She was a good listener, the kind who didn't fill silences, who let the thought complete itself before responding. When he was done, she said, "What do you need from me?" "Space initially, and your intake process. I need to understand how MWDs are currently being cycled through civilian placement." "That's not complicated. They come in, we assess them, we list them, families apply." "That process doesn't work for this population." "I know that," she said, with a flatness that told him she'd known it for years. "I've had 6 MWDs through here in 11 years. We've successfully placed 2. One of those was Axel, and I'm not sure that counts as our process working." "It doesn't." "No." She looked at him. "You have funding?" "I have a conversation scheduled with David Chen's family." He said it carefully. Chen was alive, technically, but the word family came out feeling weighted with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite gratitude. The specific emotional tangle of people whose son had gone into darkness to do something right and come back changed. His sister runs a nonprofit foundation. She's interested. You'd need a facility, staff, a training coordinator who understands MWD psychology specifically. "I know a trainer." She assessed Axel when he came in, said he was unplaceable. Carol almost smiled. "Dr. Reyes." She was wrong about him, but she was wrong for the right reasons. She was applying civilian frameworks to an operational animal. I think she'd be interested in building the right framework. "You've thought about this a lot." "I don't sleep much." She looked at Axel, who had been sitting beside Jack's chair through the entire conversation with the patience of an animal that had learned to wait out human discussions without making a fuss. "He changed something in you," she said. Jack thought about it. "He reminded me of something I already knew. There's a difference." "What did he remind you of?" Jack scratched the back of his neck. It was the kind of question that wanted an honest answer, not a clean one. That the job isn't done when the tour ends, that if you're trained to protect people and you stop protecting them because a contract ran out, that's not retirement. That's just abandonment with paperwork. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "Tell me what you need," she said. "Oh, the hearing was in April. Not a public trial. Vance had a defense team and a clearance classification argument that pushed the criminal proceedings into a specialized federal track that would take months to fully resolve. What happened in April was an open session of the Senate Armed Services Committee at which David Chen testified for 4 hours, and at which a senior naval intelligence officer named Rear Admiral Patricia Gale, who had been quietly building her own file on Vance's network from inside the system for nearly a year, submitted a classified annex that ran to 400 pages and encompassed the full scope of the weapons trafficking operation. Jack watched it on a laptop in his apartment. He'd been offered a seat in the gallery. He'd declined. Marcus attended. He sat in the 3rd row in a civilian suit that didn't fit him quite right, his hands on his knees, and he watched Chen walk through the testimony with the focused attention of someone witnessing something being documented for the first time that he'd been carrying alone for too long. He texted Jack twice during the session, once to say Chen is good, and once, 2 hours later, to say they're reading Kowalski's name into the record. Jack had been standing at the window when that second text arrived. He stood there for a while afterward. The review process moved on its own timeline, which had nothing to do with Jack's and which he was not in control of, and he found he was more comfortable with that than he'd expected. He'd given what he had to give. Chen's files were in the record. The audio was in the record. The men who died in Al-Hasaka were in the record. Their names, their actions, their actual service history stripped of the training accident fiction that had been wrapped around their deaths. He couldn't undo any of it. He couldn't give Kowalski his 27 years. He couldn't give Park's daughter her father. He couldn't fix the specific way that grief had already distributed itself through the families of 6 men and settled in for the long occupation that grief accomplished. What he could do was not let the story be wrong anymore. That had to be enough. And it was, most of the time, on most days. Chen came to San Diego in May. He drove up from his family's house in La Jolla, which was where he'd been slowly unraveling the months of operational stress in the particular unglamorous way that happened when you were finally safe. Insomnia, unexpected anger, 3-hour stretches of staring at nothing that his family had learned not to interrupt. He was seeing someone, he said, which he delivered with the slight embarrassment of a man who still believed he should be able to manage his own interior life without assistance, and who was learning that this belief was wrong. He'd asked to meet at the shelter. Jack thought that was deliberate, that Chen had made the choice for a reason and had his own relationship with that reason, and didn't comment on it. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, the California afternoon doing what it did, and Axel stood between them and put his nose up into the wind. "How is he?" Chen said, not asking as a medical question, as something else. "He's okay," Jack said. "Better than okay most of the time. He still checks the perimeter every night before he settles. He'll always do that." "I know. Does it bother you?" Jack thought about it. "No, I check the perimeter too." Chen nodded. He reached down and let Axel put his nose to his hand, and the dog stood still for it, not enthusiastic, not cold, present. The acknowledgement between two beings who'd operated together in the dark and carried that forward into whatever life looked like afterward. "I want to be involved," Chen said. "In the program, whatever you're building." He looked at Jack. "I have contacts in the MWD community, handlers who separated, dogs that are in the pipeline right now with no placement plan." He paused. "And I have time. My field career is over, the cover is blown, the NOC is burned. I'm not going back under. So I have time, and I have contacts, and I have a reason to use them." "You'd be working with veterans," Jack said. "That means a specific kind of patience. I worked with soldiers for 8 years. Soldiers with cleared missions. This is different. These are people in the place after the mission, when the structure is gone. I know what that place looks like." Jack looked at him. "Yeah, you do. So talk to Carol. She runs intake. Dr. Reyes is doing the MWD assessment framework. She'll want to interview you about your time with Axel. It'll inform the protocol." He paused. "It's not glamorous work." "I don't need it to be glamorous." "Good. Because it's mostly paperwork and dogs that don't trust you yet, and veterans who are even worse at accepting help than the dogs." Chen almost smiled. It looked like something that was coming back gradually, that expression, like a muscle being retrained after an injury. "I'll manage." "Well," Marcus came down from Pendleton on a Friday in June, the first time he'd made the drive without a specific operational reason, which was its own kind of statement. He brought his girlfriend. Her name was Sandra. She taught high school history and had the specific quality of someone who'd decided a long time ago not to be intimidated by things she didn't understand, which was probably the right quality for the relationship she'd chosen. They had dinner at a restaurant that was not a diner. Actual tablecloths, actual menus, the kind of place that required a decision about what you wanted rather than whatever was hot. Sandra talked about her students with the animated exhaustion of someone who cared more than the job technically required. And Marcus ate his food and contributed less than he should have and more than he usually did, which Jack recognized as progress. After Sandra excused herself and it was just the two of them across the table with the remains of dinner between them, Marcus said, "Consulting gig is done." "Which one?" "The contractor. I gave notice." Jack looked at him. "Why?" "Because I was doing it to have something to do. And doing things to have something to do is not the same as doing things that are worth doing." He said it with the bluntness of someone who'd thought it through over considerable time and arrived at the words by elimination rather than inspiration. "Your thing, the shelter program. It's not mine, Jack. It's a nonprofit structure. It's going to be incorporated separately. Jack, do you need people?" A pause. "Yes," Jack said. "I'm trained in MWD handling. I did 2 rotations with K9 units. I know the protocols and I know the population." He picked up his water glass and put it down without drinking from it. "And I'm the other man who walked out of Alhasaka. That means something to the kind of veteran you're trying to reach. Not as a credential, just as a thing they can see when they walk in." Jack was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, the San Diego evening was doing its thing. Warm, the particular amber streetlight of the city on a clear night, people walking past in the specific unhurried way of people who had nowhere urgent to be. "Talk to Chen," Jack said. "You two are going to be working together anyway." Marcus looked at him. "Is that going to be weird?" "Probably, for a while." He knew about the mission. He tried to stop it, ran it up the chain through your CO and got it suppressed. He did everything he could with what he had. I know that. Knowing it and not being angry about it are different things. I'm not angry at Chen. Marcus's jaw shifted slightly. I'm angry at the fact that Torres, who I would have followed anywhere, was either complicit or used. And I'll never know which because he's dead, so I'm just angry at the whole shape of it. That's harder to put somewhere. Jack understood that exactly. He'd been trying to put it somewhere for months. He wasn't sure it went anywhere specific. He thought maybe it just became part of the architecture, something you built around that became structural over time, load-bearing in a way you stopped noticing because the building was still standing. The work helps, he said. Yeah? Yeah, it doesn't fix anything, but it's forward. Marcus nodded slowly. Forward, he said, like he was testing the word for weight. The program opened its doors in September, in a facility 12 miles north of the city that had been a training kennel in a previous life and still smelled like it in the good ways. Wood shavings and clean dog, and the particular outdoor quality of a space that existed for work rather than aesthetics. Carol had negotiated the lease. Chen's sister had structured the grant. Dr. Reyes had designed the assessment and transition protocols over 3 months of work that she described as the most interesting professional problem she'd encountered in 15 years, and which had produced a methodology that 2 universities had already asked to review. The first 3 dogs came in on the same September morning. A Belgian Malinois named Colt, who'd lost his handler to an IED in Afghanistan and hadn't eaten consistently in 4 months. A German Shepherd mix named Rita, who'd been cycled through 2 civilian placements and returned both times, and an older lab named Bishop, who had arthritis in his left hip and a service record that ran to 11 years, and who deserved a specific kind of ending to his working life that the standard placement system wasn't equipped to provide. The first 3 veterans came in the same week, referred through the VA, through Marcus's network, through a community organization in Oceanside that worked with post-9/11 veterans. A 28-year-old Army Ranger who hadn't slept more than 3 hours consecutively since Kandahar. A female Marine intelligence officer who'd separated 18 months ago and described her civilian life to Jack in a 10-minute intake conversation with the flat accuracy of someone filing a damage report on themselves. A Navy corpsman, 41, 2 combat tours, who said almost nothing in his initial session and sat on the floor of the assessment room until Bishop walked over and put his head on the man's knee and then said quietly, to no one in particular, "Okay." Jack watched that last one from the observation window. Just a man on a floor and an old dog with a bad hip leaning into him. Nothing cinematic about it, nothing clean or resolved or finished, but something starting. October brought the first formal recognition, a letter from the Department of Defense acknowledging the program's methodology as a model for MWD transition support, drafted in the specific bloodless language of bureaucratic approval and meaning more than it sounded. Chen framed it and put it in the break room, which Jack found embarrassing and didn't say anything about. Vance entered a federal guilty plea in November on counts that included conspiracy against the United States, murder for hire relating to the deaths of 6 service members, and illegal arms trafficking. His co-conspirators were in various stages of their own proceedings. The Senate Armed Services Committee had opened a full structural review of oversight protocols in SOCOM's interagency coordination functions, which would produce recommendations that would be partially implemented over the following years, imperfectly, but genuinely, the way real institutional change actually happened. The 6 men of Al-Hasaka received posthumous recognition in a classified ceremony at Coronado that their families were able to attend. Jack was there. Marcus was there. They stood in the back and didn't speak much. The families were given folders containing the actual records of their sons and husbands and brothers, what they'd done, where they'd been, what it had cost. One mother, a small woman in her 60s, who had the particular stillness of someone who'd been waiting for this a long time, held her folder against her chest and didn't open it, just held it. Jack watched her from across the room and thought about Kowalski in the drainage ditch, the Steelers' tattoo on his forearm, the fight songs under his breath. He thought about what it meant to be claimed by someone, the specific act of choosing to put yourself between another person and the thing coming for them. He'd been trying to understand that for 8 months, and he thought maybe he did now, not as an intellectual proposition, but as something felt, the way you felt weight. You protected people because they were worth protecting, not because the mission said so, not because a contract said so, because that was the thing you were made to do, and the making didn't stop when the paperwork did. On a Tuesday in December, Jack drove to the shelter on Gaines Street. Not because anything required it. The program was running, the cases were managed. Carol was still at the front desk and had taken on a liaison role between the shelter's regular intake and the program's MWD pipeline, a role she'd assumed without being asked, with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for a reason to do more. He parked in the same spot he'd parked the first time, turned the engine off, sat in the same silence he'd sat in that first Tuesday, 8 months before the shelter, at 04:30, staring at a ceiling and finding no reason to stay horizontal. Axel was in the back seat. He watched Jack through the gap between the headrests with those amber-brown eyes, which had gone a shade darker with age, the gray in his muzzle spreading forward through his winter coat. "You want to go in?" Jack said. The dog looked at the building, then at Jack. "Yeah," Jack said. "Me too." He got out. Axel jumped down beside him. They walked toward the entrance together, the dog's shoulder at Jack's knee, and the December air was cold and clear off the water and smelled like salt and distance and the particular morning quality of a day that hadn't been anything yet. At the door, Jack stopped for a moment, looked at the building, looked at the street, looked at the ordinary Tuesday morning assembling itself around him in the specific, unremarkable way that ordinary Tuesday mornings did, all of it continuing, all of it forward. Axel looked up at him once, then he looked at the door and waited, the way he'd been waiting the first time Jack walked in. Not for rescue, not for salvation, not for some dramatic gesture to make sense of the damage. Just waiting for the door to open so the work could start. Jack opened the door. They went in. Some of us come back from the things that were supposed to break us. And some of us find, in the strangest places, through the most unexpected partnerships, that the mission was never really over. It just changed its shape. The ones worth finding are still out there waiting in the quiet, carrying more than anyone knows. Don't walk past the door.